Hey guys, it's Mike. Hopefully you can hear me because I'm talking pretty quiet. I'm out here for a 4th of July paddle. Happy Independence Day. First time I've brought my kayak out in years. Took me a few minutes to get into a mode. At first, like 5 minutes, I was like coming out of civilization mode. And I was like, this is just work. But about 10-15 minutes into it, my brain shifted states. And now I'm in like a trance mode where it's extremely quiet out here. No humans. Just occasionally the distant hum of a vehicle. It actually felt pretty counterintuitive to break the trance by speaking for this camera. I spent a few minutes thinking what I would record. Saw some plants, thought about talking about plants, that made sense. Tried to think of a subject for Dirtbag Zen, because that's kind of the mood I'm in out here. Very zen-like. Thought of a couple rants that I have pretty much cocked and ready to rock. What am I fucking saying? A little rant about the Maine state government sucks. I did some online stuff through the state of Maine, reordering a title for a used vehicle that I'm selling, and then I tried to do my online registration, but I thought, nah, why rant in this blissful moment? It's 4th of July, so I thought about talking about this little socialism rant that I have also cooked up, but again, I felt like that wasn't really appropriate for now either. A lot of high contrast, so this little shitty cell camera is not going to pick up a lot of the scene. I think I'm on the Penobscot. I might be on the still water. I didn't really check out the map. I just went to a nearby public boat landing. A lot of these islands around me are owned by the Penobscot Indian Reservation. You're not technically supposed to trespass on them, especially as a paleface. So I kind of thought about that in my trance, thinking about the Penobscots. Sound of a bullfrog and a white-tailed deer over here doing that snort. Looks like some burrows along the edge over there, maybe otter dens. You see those? Move down, there's more. When you get into these semi-remote situations, it's always been real easy for me to contemplate historical humanity, whether that's somewhat near history of the last few centuries, or more ancient paleo-human history. What the fuck was that? I often think about the tribes of the Americas, and you got a lot of BS going on right now, trying to divide the people, trying to make certain people like old Paleface feel like they have an original sin to account for. I've always felt sympathetic to the tribes because I always felt like I got a pretty balanced history of the Americas. I had some really good teachers. My dad had an old Passamoquoddy friend, some guy named Alan Basin, who actually passed away last year. Sadly, he was somebody I wanted to talk to. Never got a chance. He was interested in reviving the language. He played music, wrote books, had some political views that were in line with mine, like viewing welfare as a weapon to sort of oppress people. But if you actually really get a rounded history, it's not clean and tidy at all. Certainly there were a lot of broken treaties, and I do view it as one of the greatest tragedies of our country, that what could have happened if we were able to forge a powerful alliance from the beginning? What if the diseases didn't sweep away people? What if fear didn't overcome the different people? But it's wrong to just view history in black and white terms. To think of the white man as just the oppressor or the conqueror. You're missing so much. Or to think of the red man as, 150 years ago, maybe certain groups of colonial peoples viewed them as just savages. And then on the flip side, you had the idea of the noble savage, as if they were basically a Garden of Eden with no conflicts. Whereas the truth lies somewhere between. Here in this area, the Penobscot, we're part of something called the Wabanaki Confederacy. Wabanaki meaning people of the Dawnland. And I don't think these confederacies were officially that old, although they may have had relationships. The Wabanaki Confederacy was opposed to the, and I might butcher this name, but the Haudenosaunee, the people of the Longhouse, which was like the Six Nations. Originally the Five Nations became the Six Nations, like the Iroquois. A lot of the southern Great Lakes areas. That group of tribes was very powerful, and they were more agrarian. They were more agricultural. They had the Three Sisters complex of maize, corn, and beans. Whereas the Wabanaki, they did have some of that going on, but the more north you got, the more you got towards hunter-gatherer and less agrarian. And one of the benefits I'll just say for simplicity's sake, one of the benefits of being an agrarian culture is you tend to produce higher populations. So you get a lot more rowdy males that need to pump off their energy. So a lot of the tribes of that confederation were much more warlike. And so they would come up into New England, into northern New England, and fuck with the Wabanaki tribes. For example, the Mohawk. The Mohawk would come up here and try to fight with various tribes in southern, what is now southern Maine, but I don't know how far up they would have gotten. Most tribes in the Americas have stories of even more ancient peoples coming before them. It's another thing I don't know much about, but here in Maine, there are island sites, coastal sites that seem to predate some of the sites of more modern tribes, let's just say. Down south you have the mound builders. They came before, like the Mississippian tribes. The original colonization of the Americas didn't just have one clear, it wasn't like one group of American tribes people came over the Bering Strait. There was at least 3 or 4. Helicopter coming. At least 3 or 4 great waves of migration. Sometime during the last ice age, 13,000 years ago, more. Fuck this helicopter. You've got these waves of people, and I really can't think of all the tribal names. There's so many, but up in the northwest, like Alaska and the Pacific Northwest, you might have like the Tlingit or the Athabascan tribes. And then sometime, I don't even know how long ago, but at some point you had what are now the modern Inuit, or what were sometimes called the Eskimo. They were probably the last migration from Siberia. And they did a similar thing as some of the European colonists, let's say the Pilgrims. They had dog sleds and they had steel implements. And originally they crossed over and befriended whatever the native tribe was of the area. And then after a while just kind of stomped over them. Went all the way across Canada. And then supposedly encountered the Vikings, Leif Erikson, those early Viking settlements in Greenland and Newfoundland. And drove them off, probably killed them all. They weren't like the stone implement tribes that the Vikings may have first encountered. And then here in New England, you have a similar story. Kind of have your naive kid story of like, oh, the Pilgrims came, they were weak, and the tribes helped them, and everybody was happy and made little hand trace cutout turkeys for fucking Thanksgiving every year. Whereas the real story is a little more complicated. Of course, none of us were there, but you had a more complex relationship where it would have been, originally there was a lot of benevolence between the Europeans and the original tribes of the Americas. After those long boat rides, there's some sort of passage. There's a historian, I forget his name, he's an Italian guy. He's been on Joe Rogan. He talks about a passage. He uses a phrase, I can't remember it, maybe I can pull it up. But he uses a phrase that was basically like la gente en Dios, which is like the people of God, or people in God, or of God. En is like a Spanish, it can mean like surrounding or on or in. So en Dios. And he speculated maybe that was what one of the forebears for the name Indian came from, despite the idea that they were trying to think that they were going to make a route around to the Indies, India, who knows. It's an interesting idea, but it's all pretty tragic history. It does seem like there was some pilgrim, and YouTube will not let me say that word, so I'll censor this on YouTube. But there was some pilgrim cart that sort of double-crossed on his treaties. You had a lot of settlers getting along with the tribes, and then you kind of had these motherfuckers that were occasionally backstabbing, and you'd only have to backstab once before you get the whole Cain and Abel eye for an eye process. What's that famous American feud, the Hatfields and the McCoys? Somebody kills somebody's brother, and it doesn't really matter who's at fault. Both families are just going to be pissed, and the revenge and the honor killings never really stop. So you get a situation where you get one guy who fucks somebody over, and then those people, let's say the tribes, seek vengeance, do the same thing and kill off like a colonial settlement, and then you get word spread to the other colonial people that, oh, these savages came and killed men, women, and children. And then you get this endless blood feud. But again, that's still oversimplifying, because there was many tribes. They played many different sides. I think there might have been a couple famous Chief Josephs, but there was one in like the New York, Pennsylvania area. And you had people in those areas that grew up. You had colonial people like Anglos and Germanic descended people, the people that might have become the Pennsylvania Dutch. And they lived on these borderlands of what at the time was the American frontier, and intertraded and, got along well with those tribes of the New York mountains. I think you kind of get a little bit of a sense of that in that movie, based on the book Last of the Mohicans. You got a lot of intertribal, interpeople cooperation. And so whenever you had feuds pop up, those areas would be the most resistant, because they were the ones that were in direct contact with the other side and were like, I don't know, we get along pretty well with these people. Of course, you had ancient feuds brought over, like between the English and the French. And so in this area, that becomes really relevant, because Maine had a lot of, especially coming from northern Maine, you have the Acadians, French fur trappers that were, in general, I think history portrays the French as having got along a lot better with the tribes than the English. Didn't have as many broken relationships. So England going to war with France, that came over here into the Americas. And here in Maine, which, at one time was like New France, Acadia, the English and the French fought over it. And so you had the Penobscots put between that. The Pilgrims what the hell was you have the Massachusetts Bay Colony, which was kind of the beginning in this area, spawned from the Pilgrims, who were kind of religious cunts. And so it made sense for the Penobscots to ally with the French. But that didn't work out so well. The French were defeated and driven up north, where we still have Acadian peoples that speak French up along the border in what we call the county. The thing I keep returning to is it's not even that simple. You have murky history where you have tribes people of the Penobscot who were given this whole river originally with some of those original treaties. This whole Penobscot River down to the Atlantic was supposed to be theirs, from the headwaters up near Baxter down to the coast where Acadia is. Acadia National Park was like a great summering area for them. And so when the British were coming over and the colonials were demanding their independence, you have these sort of lost tales of the Penobscots burning British boats and never really getting their due from the colonial governments. And then kind of flash forward, like I said, there were a lot of broken treaties, things that were, misconstrued, people making deals that they shouldn't have. Sometimes you even have the Bureau, you have the Indian Bureau or the Bureau of Indian Management or whatever it was called, having to go in and nullify certain treaties because certain colonists were trying to make deals with tribes that they weren't really entitled to. Flash forward to modern times, you had, I think from the 60s and 70s on, you had a lot of tribes started to become a resurgence of a kind of pan-tribal awareness where tribal differences were set aside and they started to forge an identity of, Indian Americans, First Nations, that kind of thing. And they started to fight smart within the system, getting lawyers, fighting legal battles, and getting settlements. So in Maine, you have a bunch of famous settlements where they were awarded, many millions of dollars to compensate for the lands that were not rightfully honored within the treaties. There's actually still a lot of unresolved controversy with that, and maybe that could be a future Maine rant episode. But there is some funds and something in the Maine Constitution that's missing. We have a piece of our Maine Constitution, and this isn't conspiratorial or anything, this is a current issue. There's a section of our Maine Constitution that's blacked out to the public. You can't look at it. You think you'd be able to see it, but you're not allowed to look at this section. And I think you can only see it if you're in like some really privileged position within the government. And there's still an ongoing battle to get that section revealed because it has sort of original text of what kind of funds were given for the tribes. When Maine broke off from Massachusetts, they were given, it was like in the 1800s, so I'm not sure what the amount of money was. Maybe I can pull that up here. But they were given some certain large sum of money that was meant to manage the tribes, that was to be given to them for perpetuity. And in today's funds, in today's dollars, it would be something like, many dozens or even hundreds of millions of dollars. So there's groups trying to get that revealed. We'll have to look into that in a future episode. But it's likely the state just spent the money or something because they don't want to show it. Lots of mixed up dark history. You had tribal peoples that would do to use the word flippantly, savage things to each other. So these things would be done to the colonists too, but they would have done these things against warring tribes. So you might capture a leader, and the leader of a war party might be, everyone else might be killed, but the leader might be tortured to sort of teach a lesson for what they brought on against the tribe. So they had all kinds of funky tortures. Like, there was one book I read from the New York some sort of New York tribe, the Adirondacks or something. You know, they'd do things like they would tie you to a tree and they'd have the young boys practice their bow and arrows on you, and they would be using their kid bows so they wouldn't be exactly lethal. So it might take like a few days of them sticking you with little arrows before you died. Or worse, they might cut open your stomach, take your intestine, nail it to the tree, and then release you and just start whipping you so you'd be running around the tree and you'd pull your own gizzards out. They didn't necessarily treat like women and children as off limits when it came to war. You might have, you know, why would you want to take care of a bunch of weak beings after you're trying to raid another tribe? You just smash the babies against rocks. And then on the flip side, those same tribes would have situations where they would occasionally take in captors and fully integrate them into the tribe. So one of these books I read, it was written from the perspective of an old white woman who had been abducted as a very young girl. And she explains this situation, which correlates with some other historical accounts, where her family was killed, but she was kept. And there's this like ritual that happens where the women of the tribe, they have her in the hut, and it's basically like this emotional purge where they greatly mourn the loss of one of their own. It's described that they're beating their chests and pulling at their hair, and they're wailing like, oh, we lost our sister so-and-so, and we lost our brother so-and-so, and they had this kind of repetitive sort of chant-like thing that they were going on, and they were truly crying and wailing, like this catharsis, this tribal catharsis for the lost member. And then somewhere within the ritual it switches, and then they start exclaiming like, oh, but the Creator has given us a new sister. And they're talking about this white girl. They've given us, the generous Creator has given us a new sister to replace the one that we lost. And then they basically start doing this ritualistic thing where they're, you know, exclaiming and showing their gratitude and celebrating the new sister. And then that white girl was fully integrated. She wasn't like a slave or something, which definitely happened in a lot of tribes. You might get like a slave-like person. But anyways, this was a lot of free-flowing thought with a lot of pauses, so I'm going to stop it here. I'm going to edit it. I don't know how much pauses I'll leave in it. It'd be nice if I could just leave a 30-minute uncut video, but I know the viewers don't want to see my constant pauses as I think, and as an editor, I don't like watching them either. I kind of obsessively try to snip out the dead spots. So maybe we'll do something in between. Just something to think about while I'm floating out here in the silence, thinking about our past on the 4th of July. If you're watching this on YouTube, throw a thumbs up. If you've made it this far, you're a friggin' hero of the channel. And if you like uncensored content, you want me to keep the curse words in, go over to my BitChute. BitChute's still the frontier, so it's not for the light of heart. You're gonna see people that say things that you don't like, uncomfortable ideas, offensive ideas in the comments. Only go over there if you're a big boy or a big girl. BitChute is pushing my videos a lot more. I've been on there for about a month, and new uploads here are getting like 12 views, whereas BitChute's getting like 100 views. So, make your choice. Hope you guys have a great weekend. Airplane. Fucking pale face of the sky. That's it. I'm gonna paddle back to my car. I'll upload this footage. I'll make an upload. My last couple uploads, I did another episode of my plants. I have some on deck, and I'm seeing a lot of plants on this paddle that I think I want to come visit again in like another week. I see some lotuses that I want to film. There's a lot of silver maples, which are really common in areas that flood. I see some viburnums. Peace out, everybody. Man, I put my phone away just a minute too soon. I couldn't get it back out, but as I'm paddling and I'm almost back to the boat landing, You can see the bridge in the background there. Bald eagle just soars over my head. It sucks that I couldn't catch that on camera, but what a fucking great omen to end this with.